Ever since I started learning to code, my goal was to eventually have my own software product. Obviously, I spent the last few years making a lot of tutorials for this channel, but the plan was never to do this indefinitely. I eventually wanted to have my own real tech startup, basically, because this is the exciting thing about programming for me, that you can build something out of thin air that people use and you can make money from it. Now, obviously, building a startup is not an easy undertaking, but it's possible and people are doing this, and I have been wanting to do this for years now, ever since I started programming. And when it comes to startups, there seem to be two different ways to approach this. One is the way that we most often hear of, where someone has this amazing idea and then they need to look for investors that give them money to build this thing, and then either it becomes a unicorn and makes a ton of money, or it fails. And we most often hear about these unicorns like Facebook and all these other big companies. But of course, most of these ideas fail, and this was never really that appealing to me because I don't want to have this gamble. I don't want to spend months of my life building something with a very small chance of it actually succeeding. But there is also this other approach where people build these small software businesses either by themselves or with very small groups, but without investment. And even though these projects are small, they can still make a lot of profit. They can still make a couple thousand, a couple 10,000, even a couple $100,000 of income per month. And to me, this approach always seemed more appealing because then I don't have to look for investors. And I don't have this pressure that it has to succeed to pay out these people who invested in it. And all I need to invest is basically my time. And to me, this always seemed more realistic and less risky. And since I focused on my tutorials and on my channel so much, I kept postponing this. But with these kind of things, it's important to not overthink it forever, but to eventually just start something. And even if the first thing you try out doesn't succeed, I think it's very good to get a foot in the door and just start building something and get a feeling for how this works, what problems you run into, educating yourself along the way and just learning the process. And so I've started building a little SaaS, a little software as a service project, which I want to show you in this video. And I think when you try to build a startup, it's useful if you try to build something that solves a problem that you have yourself. Because then you know that this problem actually exists, because if you have this problem, it's very likely that other people have this problem too. And also you can use your own product and then see if the solution actually solves the problem or not, if it's actually working as intended. I think this approach is also called dogfooding, which basically means using your own software or your own products to see if they work as expected. The project I'm building here is pretty simple, and this is another thing that I think is just important to get started. Don't start with building a huge project, because then the chance that you don't finish it is just too big, in my opinion. I like to try to find something small. And a problem I often had myself as a YouTuber was that it's very tedious to answer YouTube comments. What I mean in particular is that I have to click so many buttons in order to engage with comments. So when I want to reply to a comment here in my YouTube backend, I have to click reply, of course. So then I have to type this in and either press on the reply button or Control Enter to send this. I also often want to like or heart comments. And again, I have to move my mouse over here to click this button. And if you get a lot of comments, this can be really annoying. So my idea was to build a tool that lets me do all of this just with the keyboard, because the keyboard is generally more efficient. So this is what I've been building here. There are different ways to start the extension. Again, it's all in this very early version, so it's not beautiful yet. As you can see, the buttons I added here, they are very intrusive. I don't want to keep them like this because they are way too bold. So to start this extension, we have to go to the comments tab here. And this right now is the icon for the extension. Here's the start button, which is ugly as well. but doesn't matter. So we can either click the start button and the extension starts at the top. As you can see, the other buttons here disappear. I can also click on one of these buttons to start right at this comment, or I can press a shortcut, which is Ctrl-Shift-S by default. Okay, so again, the idea of the extension is to answer YouTube comments, and not only answer them, but also interact with them just by using the keyboard. So when I started, there is a comment that is highlighted. I can move up and down with the arrow keys. And if there is a comment that is very long and has this this read more tag, this would be another click that is very annoying in my opinion, because of course I want to read the whole comment. I don't want to have to click again. So when I select the comment below, then it automatically extends it. And as you can see, it adds this hint for the different keys I can press to interact with a comment. So he says, hey, great tutorial. I was wondering how could I make this inputs for mobile? Thank you. I don't have the answer for this right now. But if I want to answer, I press enter. It opens the answer box as normal. I can send or cancel it with keys as well, and I don't have to use the mouse at all. I can press Q to heart the comment, as you can see. The same for liking. I can insert one of these auto suggestions here, which by the way come from YouTube itself. So this is not something I implemented. This is coming from YouTube. But this is also another idea for a new feature in the future, to add more of these AI generated suggestions or canned responses that I will probably also add number keys to. So you can prepare these canned responses for terms or sentences that you say very frequently, and then you can also insert them just by pressing a certain key. When we have comments that already have replies, like the ones here I already replied to, then I try to be intelligent about which reply is selected by default. So as you can see here, if we have a comment, then it automatically highlights the last reply that is not from us, because usually you don't want to reply to your own reply, right? I don't want to reply to this one. I usually want to interact with this one, but we can move up and down by holding the shift key. So the shift key is the way how we navigate within a comment thread. And with the normal up and down keys, we jump between these different top level threads. So as you can see, the extension is still very basic, but in my opinion, it's already pretty useful, because I can do the same stuff as I did before, just without using the mouse ever. But we can still use the mouse. So when I click on a comment with the mouse, then it selects this particular comment. Yeah, of course, the extension still has some bugs, but it's a working first version. Now, in case you've been wondering what the E stands for, the name of the extension is Engage a Lot, which I think is a genius name, but I didn't come up with it myself. My friend Don Felger created this name for me. So shout outs to Don Felger. You can follow him on Twitter. He posts a lot of interesting stuff. Yeah, and the extension also has a URL already, engagealot.com, where right now there is a waiting list that you can join. Obviously, right now the extension is only useful for YouTubers. I'm planning to extend it to, for example, Instagram DMs in the future, but not right now. So if you are a YouTuber, or if you know a YouTuber that could use this extension, please point them to this URL and add your email address here, and I will notify you as soon as the extension is ready. And the first version will be on the Chrome store soon. And if you add your name to this waiting list here, you will also get a discount when we are launching. Now the plan is to make this extension paid eventually, to add a paid plan. However, I also want to add a very generous free tier. So I thought maybe the first 300 or so comments every month that you use this extension on, or maybe 300 interactions or something like that, should be free. My plan is to keep this free for small YouTubers, so that they can get used to this extension without having to pay anything. And then only bigger YouTubers that really use the extension extensively should have to pay for a license. So this is the idea at the moment. So again, if you are a YouTuber or you know a YouTuber, please visit engagealot.com and add yourself to the waiting list. And I will notify you as soon as this is ready. Now, while building this extension, I'm trying to follow the lean startup approach, which is described in this book here, the lean startup. I think it's mirrored right now, but yeah, I think you can still read it. The Lean Startup is the name of the book. It's an amazing book. First of all, I really like it. It's one of the not so many books that are really worth your time, because many other books are just better suited in a 10-minute YouTube video. This book is amazing. And the idea is basically that the mistake is to sit down, build this very complicated, full of feature project that you have in your head, and then one day release it to the public and just hope that people want to use it. This is what most of us want to do intuitively when they build a startup, right? We have this idea in our head of this perfect product with all its features, and we want to finish building it, and then we want to release it to the public and everyone likes it, hopefully. Instead, the idea of the Lean Startup method is to build a minimum viable product. You probably heard this term before, an MVP, which is only a small first version of your final product. Because think about it, even if you're right and what you're building is useful and people want to use it, then it's still very likely that they don't want to use exactly all the features that you put in there. So you could be spending months of your time implementing a complicated feature that is technically difficult to implement, and then when you release it, people don't actually want to use this feature. So what you should do instead is you should build this minimal version, release it to the public, let people use it, and get input from your users. See if they actually want to use this feature, or if they don't actually need it. Ask them, maybe with surveys or by observing their usage, what they actually need, what features they actually need, and then go ahead and implement these features in the next version, in the next iteration of your MVP. So these MVPs are small experiments, basically. So yeah, this was not the best summary of the book, but this is basically the idea. So in my example, in my project, I don't sit down and build the whole thing with all its features. I build a small first version. I put it out there with a paid license already available. So only because it's an MVP, it doesn't mean it should be free, because you need to know if people are actually willing to pay for this thing eventually. It's important to know, otherwise it will not be profitable. But I don't implement all the complicated features that I have in my head. I build a simple version first, then I see how users like it, if they use it the way I intended it, and what features they are asking for, and then I add these additional features. And I think not only is this a less riskier and less time wasting approach, it's also more fun, because you get something out earlier, which is a feeling of success. So I really like this approach. Again, if you want to know more about this, you should read the whole book. It's called The Lean Startup. Totally worth it. It's an amazing book. Okay, and how did I go about actually building the thing, the extension at the current state it is at? Because as you know, my expertise is in Android development. I don't have any experience with building a Chrome extension, and I have very, very little experience with JavaScript, which is the language you build a Chrome extension with. So what I did was I started with a simple beginner tutorial, which I found directly in the Chrome documentation. I went through this beginner tutorial. It was very short, very quick, but obviously the beginner tutorial doesn't cover everything you need to know. It only gets you started. And this whole topic of building a Chrome extension was very intimidating, because it was new for me, and I tried to build a real thing, right? So I have to really understand how this stuff works. I'm not building a little example project. I built something real with real functionality. And I was looking for some more advanced tutorials, but I didn't find any that were really good. And even if you find some, or if you find an advanced tutorial, then there will not be much overlap between what you're trying to build and what the tutorial is teaching you, because your project is very individual, right? So what I did instead is, and what I think is the only way to really approach this, is to start somewhere, anywhere you can start, and then go in really, really small steps. So my extension, right now we can navigate between these different comments, and it puts these hints there, and I can press buttons. But of course at the beginning I had no idea how to do this. I had no idea how to highlight a comment, how to move between them. So you really have to go in very, very small steps. First of all, I use the Chrome developer tools to find out how I can select a particular element in this web page, right? To see that I'm actually looking at the correct element, then I try to make it invisible first with the hidden attribute in CSS. Then I tried to change the background color, and of course, first of all, it was the wrong element. Then I had to experiment, get the right element. Then the next thing I would Google is how you can do the same thing, but not in the Chrome developer tools, but in JavaScript instead. So you write some code, and first I had no idea where to put this code, so I tried different places, and then I tried to highlight a specific comment from there. And then you go for the next small step. The next small step, for example, could be how do I take user input? So again, you Google this, you find some Stack Overflow answers, you try this out, and instead of moving between different comments, because right now I don't know how to get the next element on the screen, instead of trying to do this directly, which will probably fail, what I did instead first was to just log something to the console when I press a button. This way I know that the button is actually pressed. And then I can try to go for the next step and maybe try to remove the background color from the comment that was highlighted before and highlight the next one using some kind of index. But again, this is a difficult task and you just have to try it out until it works. And then you go for the next small step. So you really go in these very small steps where you know that you have a way to see if what you're trying to do is working. Because if you try to do too much stuff at once, then only one piece in the chain has to fail for everything not to work, right? So you only try to focus on the next little thing. And then you go from making a single element yellow to being able to navigate between them, to highlighting the right comments, to inserting these comment hints. And then slowly but surely you build up this real functionality. And the two most important tools for that are Google search. So you have to Google the next step and there's almost always an answer on Stack Overflow or somewhere how to do this thing. And what you also need are log statements. Not only in web development or Chrome extension development, also in app development or anywhere else. Log statements are really one of the most important tools. Because with log statements, you can always check if the code is doing what you expect, even if the feature itself is not fully working yet. So you can always use log statements to see if a variable has the correct value at the correct time, if you get into the correct branch of an if-else statement and stuff like that. Or for example, what happens if you press a certain button. Log statements are extremely important because just by looking at the screen and seeing if it works, you first of all don't know what is happening under the hood often. And often you are also in a situation where the feature is not developed enough to actually put something on the screen. You're in the middle and you need to know if you're on the right track. This is what you need log statements for. Also, you should just get used to accepting a certain level of confusion. When I developed this Chrome extension, I have a ton of different tabs open for questions I was trying to figure out. And you have to accept that you sometimes don't know if you put this in the correct place, what this is for. But if you just keep on it and adding these small steps and then going back to these old tabs later and reading through more information there and these answers, then you slowly but surely get a good idea of how this whole thing worked without needing an advanced tutorial that holds your hand and walks you through it step by step. This way you are able to do it by yourself by just going for these small steps and accepting that the process is confusing and difficult. But eventually the fog will disappear and you will understand more and more parts of it. And then one day you are suddenly an expert in this topic. Now when we look at the code here, obviously it's very messy. Again, it's not my expertise to build this kind of extension, but I try to keep the code as clean as possible with the knowledge that I have, but I'm also not neurotic about it. My most important goal is to get this thing to work without creating too much tech debt. Now when it comes to building a Chrome extension, I have no knowledge about what kind of architecture you would use here. So I just do what makes sense to me. I have this content script, which basically contains most of the functionality here. And then I created this helper script, which contains some stuff that I thought I could extract from the content script to make it more readable. But again, I have no idea about building a proper architecture for this kind of extension, and I also don't want to start with that because, to be frank, it's too boring to start with this kind of stuff. I don't want to spend weeks just with the preparation, so I have a very clean architecture. Instead, I want to get this to work ASAP and then improve it along the way. And I think this is a good approach. So a lot of this stuff here is pretty messy, but it's not so messy that I don't have an overview anymore. So I try to keep some clean code practices. I try to keep method names that are self-explaining. I try to separate the methods logically so that I don't create too much tech debt and I can later still make changes to this code without getting too confused. Also, my knowledge that I had with Kotlin already helped me with JavaScript, even though these two languages are quite different. But as I often say, if you learn one programming language, you have an easier time learning another one or even a completely different framework, because there are still many similarities. For example, JavaScript has function arguments, where you can pass a function to another function. I don't know if I find an example for this right now. Let's see, we have these arrow functions, like this here, for example. This is very similar to a function argument in Kotlin. The syntax is pretty similar, just some different symbols. But knowing how this stuff works in Kotlin helped me immensely with transferring this knowledge over to JavaScript. Now, still, these two languages are quite different. As you can see here, function arguments don't even have types. We just declare the variable name, but we can basically pass anything to it what we want. This is quite funny. It makes you faster in development, I guess, and gives you some more flexibility because you can pass different types. But of course, there is also a benefit in having type safety, like in a statically typed language such as Kotlin. So there are benefits and downsides, I guess. Now, there was only one really difficult problem I ran into, and this is how these comments are ordered here in this list. Now, you would expect that comments that are below each other are also below each other in the, I guess this is called DOM, the HTML structure. I'm not sure what DOM actually means, but you would expect to have the same order in the HTML structure over here right now, right? And to a certain extent, this is the case. So as we can see here, they are below each other and they are also below each other on the screen. But at a certain point, this is not the case anymore. Instead, they can appear in any arbitrary order, I think, and instead they are ordered by this value here, by the translate 3D value. So an element can be down here, but it can have a lower translate 3D value, and then in the actual comments list on the screen, it's above the one that is below it in the HTML structure. This, of course, made navigating between these different elements much more difficult, because then I can't just use an index to move up and down between these elements. Instead, I had to order these elements by the translate 3D value. And this is what this algorithm here is basically for. You can see that we extract this value here in this other function by reading this property, splitting it at the correct place, and then we order our comments by this translate 3D value instead. Now, I didn't come up with this algorithm myself. I get help from it from Stack Overflow by asking my own question there. So as you can see, Stack Overflow is an amazing resource if you are stuck. There are very, very smart people that will help you with these kinds of problems. And this way I was able to figure this out and be able to navigate between these comments, even though the HTML structure is all over the place. Again, I was very, very dependent on log statements here to print out these different values that we are getting. Without log statements, I wouldn't have been able to figure out how to get this to work eventually. So always use log statements in your code. The rest of the stuff was a lot of trial and error, a lot of just coding, trying it out. But other problems were not as difficult as the translate 3D one. Now, one challenge I will have in the future, if I keep this extension alive, is YouTube can always make changes to the HTML structure, right? So I have to keep up with this. But I think it should be possible. So again, you can add yourself to the waiting list on engagealot.com. And what's left for me to do right now before the first release is I still have to fix some small bugs, even though it's okay if an MVP has some bugs. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to get it out. And I'm also in the process of preparing a server so I can actually create a user login and add these paid tiers for when the limit of the extension is reached, the limit of the free tier. So this is something I still have to do before I can release this. Creating such a server and these paid plans is also something that's completely new for me. So it's not like I already know how to do this. I will figure this out along the way. But most of the stuff is learnable. So yeah, that's the plan for now. Again, it's a learning process. Even if the extension fails, I have built something useful for myself because I'm actually using this already and I find it very useful. And yeah, that's the idea for now. Add yourself to the waiting list if you want, or if you know a YouTuber who could use this extension, please tell them about it. And I will keep you updated about this whole project. Take care.